Welcome to the Soil CRC's Building Technical Capacity for Improved Soil Management webinar series, Soil Characterisation Using a Soil Pit. In this video, Abigail Jenkins from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries guides viewers how to characterise a soil pit, including planning and supporting resources, techniques for characterising different soil horizons, the use of monoliths and other existing sites as alternatives to traditional pits, as well as how to access online soil data for New South Wales.
So as Felicity said, she just asked me to sort of talk to you about some tips and tricks, I guess, about talking to a soil profile. And just before we get into that, I just wanted to sort of preface that by saying I suspect that a lot of you are better at this than you think you are. And sometimes it's just a confidence thing. And so to get over that, I would just say do lots of practice and even do what I did for this, because I wasn't sure whether I could come today. I actually went out and videoed myself just out on my road because they're doing some road work down there. So that gave me the opportunity to have a look at the soil that had been exposed. And as excruciating as it is, you know, you can watch yourself back and learn from yourself, or even if you're up to it, share with people within this community of practice that you've got going and learn from one another like that. So let's get on to it. So I guess the most fundamental first question is, why would you want to have a soil pit? And that's really important because that'll determine you know, how many pits you use, where you might site them, what it is that you really want to show. Obviously, I mean, lots of this sounds really sensible, but I think a lot of people go into the digging of the soil pit without actually thinking about that. So, you know, it would, if you wanted to have a comparison, perhaps sometimes you can put those in the two pits in different locations, or if you're lucky, and you're looking maybe at a cropping situation, you could get something from, you know, like a wheel track across to a bed. Think about those sorts of things. It also determines what kind of demonstration or hands-on activities you might like to focus on. And I would advocate that you try and get people to do all the demonstrations that you do, get them to do it as well, because it just reinforces all their learning about what you're trying to say and what you're trying to focus on. It also obviously determines what kind of expertise you might like to invite to have within the pit with you, because I always find that it's helpful to have more than one person in a pit, because you can kind of bounce off one another. And if you forget something, someone else will probably pick it up. And also who you want to speak to beforehand to sort of get an idea of the site and what you might see and that sort of specific expertise. And then obviously what resources you'll need to do all that. So that's the why. The next bit's the digging. And this is just the workplace health and safety slide, really. Oh, we've gone too far. There. So we want less of this top slide, more of this. And obviously the workplace health and safety stuff's governed by a whole lot of legislation, and each state has their own sort of documents around that, and then safe work methods and all that sort of stuff. So it would be good to look into that, and that governs the things like the depth, width and access of your soil pit. So which is why I put this second picture in, which is a picture of Jason Condon and Helen from New South Wales DPI, and it's a really nice pit, lovely and wide, has a nice sort of batter at either end for people to get in easily. The steep sides are roped off so people can't fall in and break their ankles, should they do that. And then the depth stuff, the thing to remember is that the depth is determined by the profile depth, but as well as the spoil. So if you want to go deeper here, make sure your spoil's as far back as you can so that's not counted in there. And obviously if you want to go deeper, then I can't remember what the prescribed depth is, it's a metre something, then you're supposed to have shoring and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing to remember, which I haven't written here, is that if you're having someone dig the pit, particularly if they haven't dug a pit before, that they don't drive over the surface of the face that you want to see, so they don't compact that, and so that what you're looking at then is compacted, not what you would normally see in its natural state. So that's something to think of. Obviously, there's a whole dial before you dig stuff, which is important to remember, so that you don't get slapped with some kind of fine or have some irate landholder because you've dug through their water pipes or something. And then the thing that I really wanted to impress too is that you don't actually have to use a pit. You can use existing things, and that can be a really good cost-effective way of seeing more, I guess. So you can use road batters, and the video that I made that I'll show a bit later on uses one of those. And then also there's existing excavation sites that you might like to use. The thing about those two is that you'll just need to spend a bit of time cleaning up the face of the soil pit, so you can actually see the true soil and profile, not that bit that's been weathered by that face being open to the elements for ages. Or you can do a thing called a soil peel, which essentially just is spraying a whole lot of latex onto a soil profile and then peeling it off. It's kind of laborious and time consuming, but if you're interested in collecting a soil profile and having it there in the long term, because then you get to keep it, then that might be a good option as well. And if you're interested in that, there's this farm note that Tim Overhew in Western Australia wrote, which sort of outlines that process. So it's a kind of a monolith. And the other thing to use, I guess, is monoliths where they exist. So you might have a soil pit, but then you also might have a couple of monoliths there as a comparison or something, depending on what you want to say. And I know in New South Wales, we've got various collections of those all over the place. So it's just a matter of finding where they are. Like in the North Coast, we've got a bit of a collection that, Kel is aware about. And then I think there's some up in Armidale. I think we have some in Wagga, that sort of thing. So just try and suss those out. So that's the digging bit. Then this is the what do you use bit. And quite like this picture. I think it's from the States, so it doesn't have the tape around the edge like it should, but it just shows you a slightly different way of doing the pit. So it's a walk-in pit, good for smaller groups. And the kit, obviously, a lot of what you will have seen before. Now, although this is not a spade, it's a corer, but you should have a spade, and you could also have a corer as well, and talk about how that's a different way of looking at your soil and the limitations of that compared to other things. There's a tape measure, of course, which is really important to show the depth at which certain things are, and quite like the nifty way that they've used the fluorescent paint here to delineate the different horizons of the soil. So that's a kind of a nifty thing to do as well. Then there's the stuff that you would no doubt be aware of, things like your pH kit, there's your universal indicator and your white powder, and the water bottle for textures and things like that. Small plastic bowls that are white are really good for doing things like pH, but also things like slaking and dispersion kind of tests, and the white makes it easier for people to see. Then you have something like, I use a screwdriver, other people use a palette knife. These people are probably using this GeoPick here to pick back the face. So I said that's the first thing you have to do to make sure you're seeing the soil as it is in profile, without all the smearing from the excavation machinery that you've used. And you can see they haven't obviously got down to there, because you can still see the teeth marks from the digger. They've also got these really great little things on information cards on spikes, which I think is good. It can help draw people's attention to things that you really want to show and stress. I haven't used the stand bits, that's very fancy. I just usually just photocopy something, and then you can laminate it and just put a hole punch in it and then stick it into the face of the the soil profile, and it's really good for directing people's attention to things that are smaller that they may not see, like wormholes or different sort of soil features. So that's really good. The other thing that I wanted to point out on this image, which I thought is really cool, is that it looks like they've benched out and taken samples from each of the different horizons here. I don't know if you can see that. So these are larger soil cores, and you could do each of the tests that you do, the texture, your structural stability, your pH, on each of those. So that's kind of a nifty way of presenting that. The other things that you could have in your kit that aren't on the picture are things like a weak acid. So if you think you might have some free lime, you can use that to, it'll fizz, and that's kind of interesting for people to look at. A tarpaulin if you wanted to get samples from elsewhere. And then things like the wire penetrometer and the quadrat, which are homemade bits of equipment that you can find out how to make from the Northern Rivers Soil Health Card. So they're really easy at home things, and can be useful in looking at those things that are a little bit further away from the pit, like the quadrat for the, obviously for your percent ground cover, but you can also throw it around and do organism counts and stuff for your soil biology as well. If people don't want to get their hands dirty with the texture ribboning, you can use the jar test, where you just put a sample in there and shake it up and let it settle. And then obviously there's things like water and all that sort of stuff for washing your hands. So I thought that's a pretty good complete kit. Then, so the basic point of what we're here for is like, what do you look at? And this, this fairly long list, I guess, I've sort of adapted from this book, which is a Western Australian book. And I think if you're unsure or not confident, it's a really good book to work your way through. And you could even do that you have it in the profile or in the pit with you. It takes the perspective of looking at a soil profile for classification purposes, which may not be your purpose, but it goes through each of the sort of things to look at in the tests, and it has how to carry those out. So it's a really good handbook, I think. It's not very big. It's online. So, but the main thing, the first thing would be, in my opinion, is to talk about where your soil is in the landscape and a little bit about its geological history. And I think it's a really good way of engaging people. They're really interested in, why their soil is the way it is, and and you can relate that to the landscape and what they're seeing. So, generally this relates to this block diagram. The soils and topsoils would be shallower on the tops of hills and closer to the parent material. Gets deeper down as you go down the landscape. Maybe in the valley bottoms you have soils that are not formed on rock at all, so the parent material might be alluvial, that sort of thing. So that's what you sort of point out. As in the cases here on the north coast, we have lots of volcanic activities associated with the old Mount Warning caldera and stuff. You could talk about different periods of lava flow and soils that form on them and that sort of thing. So that's all those were. So I've got, I think the next bit's a bit of video. So this is going to be excruciating for me to watch, but I hope you guys get something out of it. So this is the road cutting just up from my road, because they're widening the road. So they've done quite a bit of work. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to look at it. So here we go. Basically, I'm just saying they've exposed the face. So looking at the soil in the landscape. So we've sort of got hills. So the slope face is roughly westish, which is why you get this nice, the sun on the profile, which is also a good thing to think of, because sometimes it's quite hard to see soils in profile and harder to photograph them. So when you're digging your soil pit, perhaps think about that and the time of day that you'll be looking at it and the face that you'll be looking at. And then the other thing is that I have done some pre-work. So I know a little bit about the geological history of this area. So it's a transitional area between the very red ferrosols of the Alstonville Plateau down the rainfall gradient as we come inland. So similar parent material, and I've used this landscape map, which is produced by the New South Wales government, to determine that. And so these soils are similar parent material or same parent material as the ferrosols, but they've been subject to much less weathering. So there's still ferrosols, but they aren't as red as the ones on the Alstonville Plateau. So you could explain that. And then the other thing that we also know about these soils from that soil map is that they can be quite shallow and stony, and we can see that here when the video gets back. So there's the plateau further to the coast, and down in the valleys we get the alluvial material that forms the cracking vertisols that's used for a lot of the cropping in this area. So I would ask people straight away what they see first to try and get them engaged with the soil profile. So they'll often, colour is often the most apparent thing to them. So you can talk to them about what that means in terms of organic matter. You can talk about how the soil is brighter and the colour is different as you go down the profile and as that influence of organic matter is reduced. And then obviously this one, you'd also talk about the parent material being really close to the surface, and it's can't quite see in this picture here, but it's all jointed, so it's probably a basalt flow and the soil has formed on top of that. What's kind of missing from there would be really nice to have a tape measure, but it was a bit too high up for me to get to, so I'm just going to go past that one if you can't hear it. So this just sort of recaps on that. So talk about how the soil fits into its position in the landscape and how that might relate to what you're seeing now. Sometimes those soil landscape maps from New South Wales, and I'm not quite sure about other states, have great little what are called topo sequences in them. So you see the landscape and it has all the different sort of soil types that you might see within that landscape. So that's good to show that. Obviously, the total depth of the soil influences how much of that soil a plant can access, and for both nutrients and water. So you could talk about that sort of stuff, what that means in times of water stress if the soil's not that deep. You could look at things about evidence of your plants and animal activity and relate that to depth as well. So the colour's pretty obvious. You could use a Munsell colour chart if you're really into that, but I've not ever used that very much with landholders. I think it's just enough to say that, you know, organic matter will often make it darker. The red often indicates it's highly weathered and there's a lot of iron, those sorts of basic rules of thumb. And then you could talk about, how you might separate that into that profile into horizons, whether it be by colour and or texture and that sort of stuff, and then relate those sorts of things to the different ways those layers behave in terms of water movement, nutrient holding capacity, biological activity, how roots can penetrate, seedlings can emerge, that sort of stuff. And they're the kind of tools you can help use to do that. So I'm going to try and play the next one. I think what I need to do is turn the sound on. Okay, so here we are, a bit further down the slope. Not as great profile, unfortunately. Here's my somewhat dodgy tape. I don't have a nice big one with the big numbers, but I would recommend that if you're going to do this more often that you get one of those because they're really handy. People can see the distance to the different layers.
So we talked up there about obvious things like colour and how that might be helped to determine where the horizons. You could then also follow that on with a texture, so you could do textures at various levels down the profile. I won't do that because there's lots of information on the internet about how to do that. And also you could use the yellow book, so-called, obvious reasons, which has a key in it for determining soil texture and also soil structure. So get a hold of one of those, they're very useful, as well as some other things. And then you could talk about the importance of texture for things like water holding capacity and cation exchange capacity, and then go on to structure and explain the difference between the two. A lot of people, less so now, but used to use those two interchangeably, and obviously they're not the same thing. So the texture is a given. It's a really good thing to encourage people to do and get proficient at, so that they can go and do it on their own properties, won't change, and then they have that sort of baseline soil texture mapping, if you like, for their property, which they can use for management, hopefully. But the structure they can alter, obviously, through their management. So you could talk, again, using the yellow book, about structural things like the size and shape of PEDs and how you get large ones and you can break them into smaller bits. So that's your basic PED size is the smallest ones you can break them into. And in the video I've included for you by Ray Wheel, he talks about this. So then, and you could talk about how organic matter plays a role in that structure. So as you can see, hopefully on the video, the top part has, better structure, or different structure, if you like, from the one below, where there's lesser influence of organic matter, more influence from the parent material. And as I said, our parent material here is really close. So the other thing to mention, obviously that's really obvious, hopefully quite obvious when you first open a pit and talk to people and ask them what they see, is the rooting depth. Now, as we said before, this profile is really shallow, so there's some parent material here. And so even though it supports quite large plants like trees, they're obviously dependent on that really top section where all that organic matter is, all that organic life is. There's some ants there I can see. And so you would point that out. And the importance of that is both for the amount of soil that the plants have access to in terms of nutrients, but also water, so particularly in times of water stress. So if you don't have a deep profile, obviously with lots of water holding capacity, then that soil's more prone to drying out and the plants will be at risk of water stress. The other thing to look out here, which I've just noticed, which is great, is that because this is the parent material, obviously it's weathering rock like this, it's more impervious, so you can sort of see where the water comes down through the profile and hits that and sits and is quite moist there, and also a bit grey. So at different times there would be water logging here when the water infiltrates and then hits a more impervious layer and can't go any further for some time, or moves laterally like this. And this is why we get this coloration here. So you would talk about that. You would talk about how sometimes these colours are inherited from the parent material, and certainly the basaltic material that this is from has lots of iron in it, but also because of this imperviousness, sometimes you have periods where this is waterlogged and has low oxygen and you get these greeny grey colours, and then when it dries out and the iron is then oxidised, it goes a bit orangey red, like rust. And when you get further to the coast and we have the red ferrosols, there's more of that, and you get those really amazing deep red profiles. And you can show people that, so you can break that open, Sometimes there might be roots in there, and you could possibly see if some of them have been died because of waterlogging. Sometimes it's not that clear, but in some of the root channels you'll see the red from the oxidization. And this is also a good way to check and see if you can see wormholes. So you may not see biology, but you can see evidence of it. So things like wormholes, eggs, that sort of tunneling, burrowing, roots going down old wormholes full with worm castings. And going back to the soil structure, you could choose to look at the structural stability of those. So that's your test with, I advocate the white bowls, which I don't have here, but you can choose to put different PEDs from different levels in the profile and leave them for a bit and see what happens, and explain slaking, and again differentiate it from dispersion. And you would talk about the role of the soil chemistry in that, but also the important role of organic matter in maintaining soil structural stability. So you could do that. And then obviously there's the ones that people are most familiar with, the tests, things like the pH test. Again, I won't do that because I think most of you would be aware of that. You could do that down the profile, and you could choose different increments, particularly if you're in areas where there's issues about the stratification of nutrients and pH. That would be really good to show. So instead of just doing the top 10 centimetres, you might divide the top 10 centimetres up into small increments and show the difference in pH using the kit, and then talk about what that means for management and access to nutrients and things like that for the roots. What else? I haven't set it up, but here's the infiltration ring stuff, which I think I mentioned in the PowerPoint. So these are the ones that are part of the Northern Rivers Soil Health Card, which you can look at online if you haven't already. Now you could set this up on the top back a bit and fill it with water, or you could set a larger one up days before, and then you just cut a bit out there and show what's happened with the water. And it might be useful in this kind of soil, given that there's this impediment, to show that if you don't have evidence of that in the profile itself. The other thing that's good to have is keys, and I don't have them on this side of them, which is not useful. So I have various pictures of bits of soil biology that you might use, and in the PowerPoint I've also I think put a link in there to the Australian Museum. Has a really good sort of macro soil biology one that is a really good one to have, and you can just download that from the internet if you want to know what to look at. And the other thing I guess to discuss while you're in the pit is any other information that you've got around that soil. So if the landholder has some past soil testing or has done some trial work of their own or something like that, then that's a really good thing to include. And it's always good to, as I said, to take a step back from the pit and look at the landscape and where what's happening away from the soil pit face on the soil surface. And you can do things like testing for your ground cover percentage, which is a good sort of indication of some sort of biological activity. You can equate it to some sort of carbon, perhaps from their soil test if you have any. And there's you can make a quadrat out of a coat hanger, which is really easy to do like that. So I think that's all that I would cover in a soil pit, but I would try to get more interaction with the participants, obviously, and get them to do all the tests that I've talked about, and give them handling sheets, and so that they can talk about it. And there's my dogs. So I'll leave it at that, I think.
Okay, this is just again just going over that stuff and some of the aids and things that might help you with doing some of that. So if people are really interested in biology, then you can look at things like hand lens, or you can actually even get little cool little USB microscopes that so obviously that's not so great for in the field, but if you had collected some samples previously, and that means that you can just plug it into a laptop and people can see without having to fiddle around with focus and things like that. So some people find that difficult. And if you're doing that, you might like some ethanol alcohol to collect the bugs in and preserve them in. I mentioned all the other stuff, the yellow book and all that sort of stuff. So I think that I won't labour that slide very much in the interests of time. And again, this just goes over some of the things that, some of the talking points that you might mention with some of those issues. And I guess I mentioned most of them. The main thing I didn't mention was the stuff around structural stability and what a slaking soil may indicate in terms of management and how that soil behaves when it gets wet and whether it sets hard, what that means for water storage and penetration and root exploration of the soil and seedling emergence and things like that. So you could talk about that, and and just keep relating back what you see in the soil pit to how that soil behaves and how it should perhaps be managed to maintain its health. And then these are some of the resources that I talked about, and I mentioned in the video Ray Wiles' soil pit lab videos, and I think they're a really good way to well, they're really good to watch and they're really good to see how he presents that information. They're essentially for university students, but just the way he leads you through the soil pit and how he talks about it can be useful. It's good to look at lots of different things like that. I think you can pick up tips and tricks about how to present stuff. I also mentioned the soil landscape maps that New South Wales produces, and they've also got this great online tool called ESpade, which works off Google, which I'm sure Kel's aware of, which is really good to interrogate. If people are interested in that, there's a little, we did a SNOC webinar some time ago with Humphrey, who was one of the people that developed that. So he can lead you through how it works if people would like that assistance. And this is the guide I talked about that's available from the Australian Museum site, which is kind of good. It's just got little sort of line drawings of the different soil macro invertebrates, which can be really helpful if people are really interested in that in terms of identification. I think that's probably all.
Thank you for watching. If you found this information useful, there are many more related projects to discover at our website. Please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Soil CRC webinars, project updates and conference presentations. This webinar series was produced by the Soil CRC, jointly funded through the Australian Government's National Landcare program, to build the technical capacity of natural resource management agencies, landcare and grower groups to deliver soil health information to farmers for improved soil management. For more information about our projects, visit soilcrc.com.au.